Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Ryan Widmer. Ryan Widmer, a young athlete, was convicted of a horrific crime and is serving a life sentence with parole eligibility in 2025, over 10 years after the tragedy occurred. He is now fighting to overturn his conviction. The case has garnered widespread public attention across 3 neighboring states, sparking controversy surrounding his guilt. The unusual circumstances of Sarah Widmer's death and the lack of a clear motive for the crime have made this case highly controversial. Ryan and Sarah met at a local cafe they both frequented. When Ryan ordered a cup of coffee, Sarah noticed a book on his table that she had recently read. This shared interest in literature sparked a conversation that lasted several hours, covering topics such as books, movies, music, and their common interests. As they learned more about each other, they discovered a shared love for nature, traveling, and animals. With each successive meeting, their relationship grew closer and more trusting, eventually blossoming into true love. After a few months, Ryan and Sarah's relationship blossomed, and he proposed to her during a romantic dinner at the same cafe where they first met. Overjoyed, Sarah accepted his proposal. The young couple set a wedding date and began searching for a beautiful 2-story house in Hamilton. On April 10, 2008, they exchanged vows in a quaint and intimate church ceremony, surrounded by their closest friends and family. Sarah brought every detail to life, making the day truly unforgettable. She stunned in her white dress, leaving Ryan spellbound. Following the grand banquet, which was met with thunderous applause and joyful cheers, they embarked on a 2-week honeymoon to the Hawaiian Islands, where they reveled in each other's company and the breathtaking natural beauty. The young couple, deeply in love, had made plans for a future together, filled with hopes and dreams of starting a family. However, fate had other plans. On Monday, August 11, 2008, after Sarah finished her shift at the dental clinic, she met Ryan at her favorite cafe. They had dinner together, engaging in lively conversation, and afterwards walked home, where Sarah began sorting out the groceries she had bought. She then sat down on the couch, and Ryan handed her a glass of water and a pill, as she had complained of a headache during dinner. They spent the rest of the evening watching their favorite TV show, exchanging gentle kisses, and eventually, Sarah headed upstairs to the bedroom. She undressed, neatly folding her clothes, prepared a towel, lit scented candles, and put on her favorite music. Meanwhile, Ryan stayed downstairs, flipping channels on the TV remote, briefly stopping at a soccer game and lying on the couch for about 10 minutes. He called out to Sarah over the soft music, but she didn't respond. Ryan slowly made his way upstairs, entered the bedroom, and turned on the TV. He called out to Sarah again, but was met with silence. Panic started to set in, and he rushed to the bathroom, where he found Sarah lying face down in the tub. Ryan immediately pulled the plug and grabbed the phone to call emergency services. At 10:49 p.m., the service recorded the call, with Ryan frantically yelling that his wife had drowned in the bathtub, likely having fallen asleep. In his panic, Ryan failed to follow the dispatcher's instructions, wasting precious time. Under the dispatcher's careful guidance, Ryan eventually managed to pull Sarah out of the tub and performed CPR on her repeatedly. The ambulance, accompanied by police officers, arrived at the Widmer home just 6 minutes after the call. The police were initially drawn to the scene of the tragedy. Upon inspection, the bathroom appeared clean and dry, with no signs of water or scattered supplies that would indicate a hasty removal of a body from the water. The bathroom was meticulously clean. Sarah lay on the bedroom floor, nude with dry skin, but her wet hair suggested drowning. The bedroom was also tidy, leading law enforcement to suspect murder. Ryan, wearing only his underwear, was thrashing about the bedroom. When medical professionals found no pulse, they began performing cardiopulmonary resuscitation. A pinkish-white discharge from Sarah's nose and mouth confirmed drowning. Medical staff attempted to intubate Sarah twice as she lay on the bedroom floor, but both attempts failed. She was then rushed to an ambulance, where 2 more attempts were made to revive her heart using a defibrillator, again without success. Throughout the ordeal, Ryan remained by his wife's side, visibly distraught and anxious, as described by medical staff. Within 20 minutes of arriving at the hospital, medical staff attempted to revive Sarah, but at 11:41 p.m., an emergency physician pronounced her dead. Ryan, overcome with grief, fell to his knees in the hospital hallway and wept. The sudden tragedy that occurred just 4 months after the wedding sent shockwaves throughout the city, and Ryan became the prime suspect in the murder of his young wife. Ryan's initial statement, given at the hospital, raised doubts about its accuracy. He claimed that only he and his wife were at home, and that nothing out of the ordinary had happened. They had dinner at a cafe, returned home, and watched TV together. Sarah had a headache, and he gave her painkillers and helped her to the bathroom when he found her. However, the emergency call record showed that the victim was lying face down, contradicting Ryan's account. The man was distraught, repeatedly calling out for Sarah. Under pressure from the investigator, Ryan shifted from being a victim to a participant in the investigation, working to uncover what had happened to Sarah that night. He agreed to let investigators search their house. Analysis of the medication Sarah took revealed it was a common painkiller, but it was discovered that Sarah's frequent headaches and migraines had led her to take a course of drugs that altered her hormonal balance, causing uncontrollable sleep. This became the initial theory behind Sarah's death. After searching the house, police found bloodstains on the carpet. When they arrived, the bathtub was dry and there were no wet towels. The tile floor was also dry and clean, leading police to suspect that Sarah had been murdered. No wet items, clothing, or other objects were found in the house that could have been used to soak up water. Ryan's statements during the 911 call and at the hospital were contradictory, which raised suspicions and turned him from a victim into a suspect. An examination of Sarah's body revealed bruises on her forehead, neck, armpit, and upper lip, as well as lacerations on her upper lip. However, there was no clear evidence of a struggle, as her fingernails were not broken or chipped, and there were no marks on her hands, elbows, or knees. Ryan's body also showed no signs of injury or struggle. An investigation by Sheriff Bishop was inconclusive, as all the bathroom supplies were in place, and there were no signs of resistance. It was unclear whether Sarah had taken a bath that evening, or if she had not resisted and allowed her husband to drown her. Sarah's autopsy, led by Dr. Russell Apt Grove, revealed that the cause of death was drowning, accompanied by multiple muscle hemorrhages in the front of her neck and contusions on her scalp. These injuries, which occurred before her death, raised many questions, but their origin remained unknown. The investigation struggled to make progress with no leads or answers. The toxicology tests found no traces of illicit or alcoholic substances in Sarah's blood. On August 13, 2008, Ryan was arrested on suspicion of aggravated murder of his wife. The decision was based on the discrepancies in the emergency call and the crime scene, as well as the injuries found on Sarah's body. This evidence was sufficient to charge him with her murder by drowning. Despite Ryan and Sarah's seemingly perfect relationship, with friends and neighbors testifying to their deep love for each other, and their public displays of affection, no one could understand what drove them to such a tragic end. In March 2009, the first court hearing took place. Ron Cronenberger, the emergency dispatcher who received the call, testified as a witness. He described Ryan as remaining calm during their conversation, stating that it seemed like Ryan was pretending to perform CPR by blowing into the tube. The prosecution argued that the 911 call, the crime scene, and Sarah's injuries provided sufficient evidence to prove Ryan's guilt. They alleged that Ryan had forcibly drowned Sarah by holding her underwater in a bathtub. The bathtub was a crucial piece of evidence in the case. Upon examination, police found fingerprint streaks, supposedly left by human hands, closer to the middle of the tub. Using a reflected ultraviolet imaging process, fingerprints and smears were detected on the tub. A forearm print was identified, and a hair follicle test revealed that it was left by an adult male, although the exact age of the print could not be determined. However, the bathtub was not the critical evidence needed to prove the struggle between Ryan and Sarah. The prosecution suggested to the jury that a violent altercation likely occurred that night at the Widmer home for unknown reasons, and that the suspect deliberately kept quiet about it. The defense team called in an expert to testify that it is highly unlikely for someone to fall asleep and drown in a bathtub unless they were under the influence of illegal drugs or alcohol. The expert explained that the sensation of water on the face would normally wake a person up or trigger a gag reflex, causing them to cough or choke. Even if the person didn't wake up, the lack of oxygen would eventually rouse them. The pathologist who performed the autopsy testified that if Sarah's body was dry, but her hair was wet, it could indicate that her head was forcibly pushed off the edge of a bathtub, toilet, or sink. This could have happened while her head was facing forward or backward, whether the water was running or the bathtub was full. The prosecution argued that Ryan held Sarah's head underwater until she drowned, making him guilty of the crime. On the other hand, the defense argued that Ryan was innocent, primarily because there was no clear motive for the alleged crime. They pointed out that if there had been a violent struggle, as the prosecution claimed, there would be evidence of it. However, there were no injuries on Ryan, and Sarah's fingernails showed no signs of breaking or chipping, suggesting that there was no struggle. They claimed that the injuries found on Sarah were caused by the prolonged CPR, direct cardiac massage, and repeated intubation attempts made that night at the house, in the ambulance, and at the hospital. At the defense's request, Dr. Werner Spitz performed a second autopsy on Sarah. He confirmed that the cause of death was drowning and observed injuries to her neck, arms, upper lip, skull, a lacerated liver, and bleeding on her neck. However, he couldn't determine whether these injuries occurred during CPR. It was argued that the EMTs tried to resuscitate Sarah for about 45 minutes and that the deep neck bleeding likely resulted from an IV inserted in that area. The EMTs had been unable to access her arm veins. Instead of ruling it a homicide, Dr. Spitz concluded that Sarah's death was undetermined. The defense based their case on the fact that Sarah's skin was dry, which dries faster than her hair. They conducted experiments to demonstrate that when Ryan found his wife unconscious, he instinctively pulled the drain plug to try and help her and then called emergency services. This sequence of events explains why her body was drier than expected. The water had already drained from the bathtub by the time Ryan called 911. An expert witness demonstrated that a person can dry off in as little as 7 minutes after emerging from the water. A second court hearing was set for May 2010. Ryan's father, Gary, claimed that the prosecution had obtained DNA results showing that Sarah had the disease, but the prosecutor refused to disclose them, believing they wouldn't have changed the jury's verdict. However, it remains uncertain whether the jury's decision would have been different if they had received reliable evidence about Sarah's medical condition, which could have contributed to her drowning. The official reason for denying a retrial was the jury's errors in their investigation. Despite another unsuccessful court hearing, Ryan remained incarcerated. The Whitmer family received an unwelcome shock when Jennifer Cruz arrived at the prosecutor's office to testify against Ryan, claiming he was guilty. She identified herself as a friend of Ryan's, stating that they had regular communication via phone or email. According to Jennifer, Ryan contacted her on October 26, 2009 at 11:09 p.m., and his voice was highly distressed. He confided in her, saying that he had assaulted Sarah in the living room on the day she died. The trigger for the altercation was Sarah's discovery of Ryan's infidelity, leading to a prolonged argument that started downstairs and continued in the bedroom. Ryan pushed Sarah into the bathroom, leaving her without checking on her well-being. After calming down, he found Sarah floating lifelessly in the full bathtub. In an attempt to cover his tracks, Ryan allegedly wiped the water from the bathroom floor using towels and concocted a story about the accident. However, Ryan's defense team vigorously disputed Jennifer's testimony, pointing out several inconsistencies. The lawyers argued that Jennifer's account was implausible, as no wet towels were found anywhere in the house, including the dryer. Furthermore, there was no evidence of infidelity in Ryan and Sarah's marriage. The family was financially stable, and they never quarreled. Ryan's friends described him as a kind, helpful, and even-tempered person who never displayed anger. Additionally, Ryan stood to gain nothing from Sarah's death, as they did not have a life insurance policy. Before the third trial, Jennifer Cruz's credibility was called into question, and she was prevented from testifying as a witness. This was partly due to evidence of her past infidelities and petty theft convictions. Additionally, a phone call in which Ryan allegedly confessed to her was not corroborated. In January 2011, a new trial was held, prompted by the discovery of fresh evidence. The defense presented a medical opinion suggesting that Sarah's sudden loss of consciousness and subsequent drowning might have been caused by her underlying medical condition. Medical experts testified that Sarah's existing cardiac or neurological defects could have led to her losing consciousness, but the state's medical experts disputed these claims. Sarah's co-workers revealed that she often slept in her car before starting her shift at the dental clinic, and that she frequently suffered from allergies and stomach pains. On the day of her death, Sarah mentioned to her co-worker, Dr. Benjamin Mesmer, that she was experiencing a headache and stomach pain. Later that evening, a friend spoke with Sarah, observing that she looked extremely tired and complained of a headache and neck pain. Sarah's friends were aware of her ability to fall asleep easily in unexpected places, with one even speculating that she might have had narcolepsy. However, Sarah's mother testified that her daughter did not have any sleep disorders and was a healthy child who regularly underwent medical examinations, which showed she was in perfect health. The defense argued that Sarah's death was not caused by forced drowning because she didn't have any injuries to the small bones of her neck or defensive wounds on her arms and legs. Although the defense couldn't explain how Sarah died, an emergency medicine expert testified that every year, approximately 300,000 people die suddenly in the United States, and in about 33% of those cases, autopsy results are normal and show no underlying medical conditions. After deliberating for 12 hours, the jury found Ryan guilty of murder and sentenced him to 15 years in prison. Basing their decision on the fact that Sarah's body was not wet, Ryan's past history, and their belief that he had staged his 911 call. Ryan's family has passionately defended him, and the case, which dates back over 10 years, continues to unite like-minded individuals who hope to clear his name through DNA testing. While genetic material often plays a crucial role in resolving disputed charges and exonerations in cases involving unexplained deaths, what sets this case apart is the unusual request for the victim's DNA, rather than the person convicted. Unfortunately, a Warren County judge has already rejected Ryan Widmer's request to have the victim's DNA tested. Mike Allen, a former Hamilton prosecutor, noted that after listening to all 3 trials, he never found a clear motive, which is unusual in a murder case. However, the prosecutor is not required to prove motive, which makes this case even more peculiar. Ryan Whitmer is awaiting a federal court decision on a motion for his release. He has been imprisoned for 14 years, and his first opportunity for release will be in July 2025 unless a federal judge rules in his favor. According to University of Cincinnati law professor Donald Custer, who also works with the Ohio Innocence Project, proving innocence is not enough to be exonerated. There must be evidence of a constitutional error in the judicial process. In 2025, Whitmer will be eligible for parole, but his lawyers believe it's unlikely he'll be granted parole because the parole board tends to favor inmates who express remorse, whereas Whitmer maintains his innocence. Brett Seacat came into this world on March 3, 1976, in the quaint town of Kingman, Kansas, USA. As the only child of Janet Seacat and her husband, whose name and details from his previous marriage remained strictly confidential, Brad had an interesting family dynamic. Janet had another son, Robert, from her previous marriage, making Robert Brad's older half-brother. The Seacat family had deep roots in law enforcement, resulting in a household characterized by strict discipline. Though information about Brad's childhood is scarce, it is documented that he attended high school in Kingman. Brad was tall and sturdy, traits that enabled him to pursue wrestling and bodybuilding during his high school years. His dedication to physical fitness soon paid off, as he excelled in various inter-school tournaments, often securing first place. This success turned him into a star wrestler and a notable figure within his school. At 16, while competing at a major wrestling event in the Kansas City Coliseum, Brad met a girl named Vashti Forrest. Born on March 21, 1977, in Argonne, Seward County, Vashti was Julie Hostler and Clinton Forrest's third child. She had an older brother named Rich and an older sister named Catherine. A younger sister named Tyler completed their family. Vashti possessed a noble spirit and enjoyed the affectionate support of her siblings, especially Catherine and Rich, who treated her with special care. In contrast, Julie wasn't particularly affectionate and often verbally abused her children. Despite these challenges at home, Vashti's outgoing personality earned her a large circle of friends. Though she received much love from those around her, Vashti struggled with self-esteem issues. She didn't feel beautiful or intelligent enough, and often sought approval from others. This quest for approval sometimes undermined her confidence. Nonetheless, Vashti became a cheerleader for her school's wrestling team, a role she loved passionately. She never missed any matches, which led to her fateful encounter with Brad at one such event. Brad immediately caught Vashti's eye. She was deeply attracted to him from their first meeting. He instantly asked her out, fascinated by his boldness. The girl yes, and they both felt it during that initial meeting. From then on, they became inseparable. After graduation, the girl went to the University of UO, and the guy honored his family traditions by joining the police academy. However, during this period, they spent less time together, which profoundly affected Brett, who was already starting to show signs of a controlling and irascible nature. His increasing jealousy eventually became too much for Vashti to handle. Tired and overwhelmed, she decided to end the relationship. The breakup was neither violent nor traumatic. Both went on with their lives. After graduating from the police academy, Brett joined the sheriff's department in Sedgwick County, just 50 kilometers from Kingman. Despite time passing and achieving career milestones, he couldn't forget Vashti. Deep down, he still loved her and never gave up the hope of reuniting with her. When an opportunity presented itself, he visited her and shared how regularly attending church had transformed him into a new man through his faith. Brett's words appeared sincere to Vashti, perhaps due to faith or genuine love, leading her to decide to return to him. Overjoyed by her decision, Brett didn't want any delays. He informed her family of his intentions and asked for her hand in marriage. Her parents, Julie and Clinton Forrest, were delighted by this news. They believed Brett and Vashti made a wonderful couple and anticipated a happy marriage. The wedding took place in 2004. Brett and Vashti settled in a peaceful neighborhood in Kingman, where they made new friends, including Monty Weldon, a friendly neighbor who frequently invited them to barbecues in his garden. It seemed like the perfect setting for establishing their new home. However, sometimes Vashti noticed that Brett's unpleasant side resurfaced sporadically. Problems cropped up repeatedly due to his dominant disposition. When Vashti became pregnant, though, these differences seemed to fade away temporarily. In fall 2006, their first son Brandon was born. 2 years later, came another son named Bronson. The experience of recent parenthood brought about a realization for both of them. The inherent risks associated with Brett's job as a police officer required careful planning for their children's future welfare if one of them were ever absent. After thorough consideration and analysis of their situation, They chose guardianship arrangements for Brandon and Bronson should it ever become necessary. Brett's brother, Robert, worked as a trainer at the police facility in Vashi. Meanwhile, she dedicated herself fully to raising their children and managing household chores. In her spare moments, she penned down her feelings in a diary. Although Brett was a loving and devoted father, his behavior could be somewhat rough with the children during playtime, often treating them like adults. Even though Brett's violent tendencies appeared controlled, it seemed they were waiting to break free. One day at work, Brett used excessive force to subdue an inmate by slamming his head against a concrete wall. The victim sustained a fractured skull and brain damage and died a few days later. Brett faced a lawsuit for excessive use of force, but received full support from his boss, Sheriff Gary Steve. The prosecutor's office and the Kansas Bureau of Investigation dismissed the complaint, clearing him of all charges. Brett did not show remorse. Instead, he admitted to colleagues that he enjoyed violence, especially when punishing those he deemed bad people. Later on, Brett and another officer forcibly subdued a defendant who had lost control and resisted removal from the courtroom for contempt of court. This action drew praise and resulted in both officers receiving a bronze medal from the sheriff for their meritorious behavior. Despite Vashi's love for her children, she still had career aspirations. Recognizing the emptiness she felt inside, she sought and secured employment as the new human resources manager at Vito's communications company. Brett took this development ambivalently. Ideally, he wanted his wife to focus solely on household duties and the education of their children, Brendan and Bronson. It wasn't long before he began to complain about Vashi spending too much time at work, a role he didn't accept her having in the first place. Consequently, their arguments increased significantly. For the sake of their children's well-being, Vashi made extensive efforts to mend their marriage, but felt it was all in vain. She had an intuition that this situation would end badly. With the aim of resolving their conflicts, Vashi and Brett began seeing Connie Sodman, a clinical social worker, during initial sessions. Vashi expressed feelings of profound loneliness and isolation, considering couples therapy as a potential last effort to salvage their marriage. However, when she broached the topic of divorce, Brett became extremely upset, resulting in weeks of psychological harassment. He threatened to kill her if she attempted to leave, claiming he could manipulate her death to appear as a suicide because of his position as a police officer. He even mentioned the possibility of burning down their home to destroy any evidence. In the days that followed, Brett had a one-on-one meeting with Kai, in which he declared furiously that if Vashi continued pursuing divorce, he would ensure she never saw their children, Brendan or Bronson, again. He further vowed that he wouldn't hesitate to take them out of the country. In early 2011, Brett transitioned from patrolling the streets to becoming a self-defense instructor at the Kansas Law Enforcement Training Center. Meanwhile, Vashi began feeling much better than she had in recent years. She continued therapy and implemented healthy changes such as exercising regularly and improving her diet. The decision to divorce gradually became more definite for Vashi. While she felt sadness about the end of her marriage, she predominantly experienced relief and optimism regarding her future. To enhance the effects of physical activity, she started taking an appetite suppressant, despite knowing it might have side effects like depression. Within a few months, Vashi's social life became very active. She expanded her contacts at work and met someone she found attractive. She confided in her older sister Kathleen about her fears concerning Brett's discovery of her plans due to potential repercussions. Vashi also spoke candidly with her coworkers about various threats from Brett. During this time, Brett discovered Vashi was keeping a personal diary without her knowledge and took it to his office to scan and print some pages. He spent considerable time researching information on suicides, fire-related injuries, homicides versus suicides, and their causes. In the first week of April 2011, Vashi attended a final individual session with Kai due to concerns about how Brett would respond upon receiving the divorce petition. Together, they developed a protection plan for herself and their children. When the man received the papers, Brett arrived at his office on the morning of 29th. To his surprise, he found an envelope containing divorce papers. After lunch, he discovered a projector in the pantry. He used it to project handwriting from Voss's diary, traced it, and then wrote a goodbye note to his children. At the same time, Brett printed out documents on how to kill a person and pass it off as suicide. He then asked the maintenance staff how best to dispose of computer hard drives. After researching their recommendations, Brett used a blowtorch to destroy them because they contained scanned images. Following this, he threw the waste into a dumpster. Later on, Brett drove to a convenience store and bought gasoline, which he loaded into his van. Several hours later, he pleaded with Vashti to let him spend the night at home to say goodbye to his children. The man promised to leave the next morning. Although they discussed joint finances, Brett again begged Vashti to change her mind about the divorce. However, when he saw she was determined to proceed, he soon renewed his threats. Exhausted from fruitless arguments, Vashti retired to her room to sleep while Brett stayed downstairs on the couch. Around 3:15 a.m., he went upstairs with a gun in his hand and shot Vashti in the neck. A neighbor who was awake watching television heard the shot, but did not pay much attention. Meanwhile, Brett placed the next to Vashti's lifeless body and staged the scene to fake a suicide. He then doused the hallway and bedroom with gasoline and took her cell phone, calling himself from it. Subsequently, he took Brendan and Bronson to a safe house. When everything was ready, he started the fire. The flames quickly engulfed the main room and caused cartridges still in the chamber of the gun to start firing. Neighbors woke up startled at around 3:45 a.m., initially thinking there was a shooting. By 3:57 a.m., 911 operators received a desperate call from Brett, who said that his wife had shot herself. When emergency responders arrived on scene, they found the first floor of the house burning with Brett outside in Vashti's car, along with his children. A police officer asked if anyone was in the house, and Brett replied that his wife was still inside. He further claimed that Vashti had shot herself due to depression, but had asked him beforehand to take their children somewhere safe. He stated that although he tried to save her, smoke and fire prevented him from doing so. When firefighters managed to control the flames, they found Vashti's body in the master bedroom. There on the bed, just below the body, investigators found a .44 caliber revolver with the barrel toward her feet and a 5-gallon container of gasoline lying in the middle of the bed. That morning, Brett called Kai and explained what had happened. He was upset and even expressed his guilt, noting that he felt responsible for bringing his wife to this tragic end. In front of his co-workers, he maintained his CB by repeating the same details he shared with investigators. 2 days later, officers discovered Vash's diary in her car. On the last page was a handwritten letter and suicide note taken in for forensic examination. The forensic report determined Vash died instantly from a gunshot wound to the head. She also sustained gunshot wounds to her torso and thigh. Blood and lung tests were negative for smoke inhalation and carbon monoxide, normally present in fire victims. The burns on her body prevented the examiner from concluding if it was homicide or suicide. Despite Brett's threats about committing a perfect crime making it look like suicide to avoid punishment, things didn't go as planned. Police soon noticed inconsistencies in Brett's story. For instance, there were no signs of dirt, blood, or wounds on him. Another inconsistency was the position of the gun with its barrel pointing downward. This raised questions about the alleged suicide. David Fetty, a special agent with the Kansas Bureau of Investigation, questioned how the weapon ended up under the body. He confirmed that if Vash had shot herself in a horizontal position, the weapon would have fallen to the floor. If she had done it sitting up, it would have remained on the right side of the bed. Furthermore, the trajectory of the bullet did not support that Vash shot herself behind her right ear. Due to these discrepancies, David decided to dig deeper into the case. Further investigation led officers to discover documents detailing how to kill someone and make it look like suicide. While analyzing Vash's diary entry, They noticed a discrepancy in handwriting compared to her other entries. Forensic scientist Dennis McFarley concluded that the note was forged. Witnesses also reported seeing Brett destroying hard drives a day before Vash's death. Testimony from a neighbor indicated hearing a fatal gunshot at 3:15 a.m., 45 minutes before Brett called 911. This confirmed David Fetty's suspicions of foul play. On May 13, 2011, police arrested Brett. He was charged with first-degree premeditated murder and 2 additional charges of endangering his sons. Brendan and Bronson were subsequently placed in the care of Kathleen. During questioning, Brad described Vashi as not being the cheerful and balanced woman she portrayed herself to be. On the contrary, she suffered from insecurity and depression due to their rocky marriage and threats he made about taking the children away. Brad also added that after filing for divorce, Vashi felt deep depression and remorse. Consequently, she set a fire and shot herself. Despite these claims, police didn't believe him. The trial commenced on June 10, 2013. During opening statements, Deputy Attorney General Amy Haley presented her perspective to the jury and argued that no one knows better than a police officer that fire destroys evidence. When questioned about a projector, Brad stated he had used it to demonstrate to cadets how to create a fake security scenario through a real-life exercise. A forensic document examiner testified regarding the forged letter and burnt hard drives. Concerning these items, Brad claimed he destroyed them to protect his personal information, not because he needed to hide anything illicit. His attorney, Roger Falk, mentioned that Vashi had suffered from depression since high school and that her condition worsened with diet drug use. Brad's brother Robert also testified in court and supported his brother's claims by confirming that he had observed Vashi feeling depressed and sad in the 2 weeks leading up to her death. In contrast, another witness informed the jury that while Vashi indeed suffered from depression at the start of therapy, it was mainly due to the circumstances of her marriage rather than a clinical mental health issue. Recently, she had been feeling anxious about her future. The account from Rich Vash's brother echoed this sentiment, recounting the emotional turmoil in his nephews' lives. Their innocence had been shattered by Brett, leaving them deprived of the chance to get to know their parents better. Prors portrayed Brett as manipulative, claiming he used his law enforcement experience to distort facts. In response, the defense stuck to its version of the alleged suicide, highlighting that even a seasoned medical examiner couldn't determine who was at fault for the victim's death. Brett, meanwhile, portrayed himself as a loving husband and devoted father, weighed down by his wife's desire to separate. He also accused Kingman County District Judge Larry Solomoto of seeking publicity and launched into a tirade accusing the judge of seeking a ruling against him to gain a nomination to the Kansas Supreme Court. In the end, the jury found Brett guilty of premeditated murder. Judge Larry sentenced him to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 25 years and added 6 years for other charges because they would be tried consecutively. So, Brett will be eligible for parole after more than 31 years. Judge Larry also considered that Brett did not plead guilty and lied to avoid responsibility and showed no remorse. In 2015, Brett appealed his conviction, but the Kansas Supreme Court denied his appeal and upheld the original conviction. Brendan and Bronson's uncertain future initiated a custody battle between maternal and paternal families. Kathleen filed for custody on grounds that she had already cared for them for 102 days. As neither party could reach an agreement, the custody decision was left to the judge. However, it's important to note that there's been no news yet on the outcome of this custody battle so far.
On August 8, 2020, in Anchorage, Alaska, 2 Anchorage police officers responded to a 911 call made by Lizette Hoagland Hall. When they arrived at her home, they found Lizette Hoagland Hall, her son Desmond, and Lizette's friend Elizabeth Omatara Santos. Elizabeth was bleeding to death from multiple stab wounds. Hi, welcome back to Mysterious 7. My name is Matt, and today I'm going to take you back 2 years in the past to tell you Elizabeth's story. Now, I'm going to be honest with you guys. This one was pretty upsetting for me. On this channel, I try to be as honest with you guys as I can, but I have to be clear. There are some very graphic details and untold secrets that are still unfolding in this case, much of which are difficult to stomach. And it is starting to feel pretty personal to me. You see, this is the first time on Mysterious 7 that we have personally responded to a cry for help. We are not professional investigators, but when Elizabeth's brother, Santos, reached out to us, we knew we had to tell his story. Elizabeth Omatara Santos was a 37-year-old African-American woman of Nigerian-Brazilian ancestry. She was a Florida native and had been living in Alaska on and off since 2010. In the days leading up to her death, Elizabeth had just broken up with her boyfriend of 10 years, Dustin Curpius. At that point, Elizabeth left Dustin's home and went to stay with her friend and co-worker, Lizette Hoagland Hall. All friends who were interviewed by the APD following her death stated that Elizabeth was happy with the breakup, but still worried about her ex-boyfriend. Elizabeth's friends all described her as one of the sweetest, kindest, and calmest people they ever knew. Unfortunately, an argument and confrontation with Lizette wound up cutting her life short. Now, we still don't know exactly what started that fight, but the following sequence of events comes straight from police records. At 6 a.m., the fight between Lizette Hoagland Hall and Elizabeth Santos began. Lizette claimed that she and her adult son, Desmond Marcus Hall, managed to run upstairs to the second floor of their home to hide in a bathroom. From there, Lizette called 911, claiming that she was in fear for her life. At 6:16 a.m., patrol officers Tae Yoon and Valeria Estrella from the APD arrived on the scene. Once on the scene, they observed that Elizabeth was showing symptoms of mental confusion, including erratic movements and slurred speech as she was unable to speak clearly. The officers quickly assumed that behavior probably stemmed from some kind of substance that she had consumed. They noted that Elizabeth was dressed only in an open robe. The officers claimed that Elizabeth's wounds didn't seem serious, but case photos and documentation showed that the robe she was wearing was heavily saturated in blood. The officers made note of the bruising and scratches on Lizette's face that stemmed from her recent fight with Elizabeth. The second was that the surroundings were messy with knocked-over plants. At 6:42 a.m., Elizabeth was placed into handcuffs. At 6:46 a.m., paramedics arrived and Elizabeth was placed in an ambulance. At 7:23 a.m., the paramedics officially began the transport to the hospital, 37 minutes after Elizabeth was placed inside. At 7:36 a.m., the ambulance reached the hospital and Elizabeth was rushed into emergency surgery. Reports mention that the surgeons were confused about the information they were given, especially considering the extent of the injuries and the extreme blood loss.
At 7:56 a.m., the same two patrol officers, Yoon and Estrella, were dispatched and told to return to the scene to take Lizette and Desmond into custody. At 8:20 a.m., the same two officers finally returned to the scene of the crime. Minutes prior, Lizette had managed to somehow unlock Elizabeth's iPhone and call Elizabeth's sister Nikki in Miami. Nikki thought that it was Elizabeth calling, so imagine her utter shock and confusion when she heard a loud and belligerent woman yelling, "Your sister Elizabeth owes me money. She has some holes in her. Your sister owes me money. The paramedics left with her a while ago. She has holes in her. Elizabeth owes me some money. Wait, now the cops are back." That was how Elizabeth's family, all the way across the country in Miami, first found out about her life-threatening injuries. Lizette and Desmond were then driven to the police station in separate cars and interviewed in separate rooms. Now, to me, this part sounds like shutting the barn door long after the horses have run off and gone, doesn't it? Because this mother and son duo had more than enough time between the departure and return of the officers to potentially plot what to say and what not to say, and to tamper with the crime scene. So why was it assumed that they had done nothing and were in no way responsible for what happened to Elizabeth in their house? But let's get back to the timeline here. At 10:30 a.m., Lizette was interviewed by Officer Jason DeVille. During her statement, Lizette told the interviewing officer the story about the fight, running to hide and calling 911 with her son, and then seeing Elizabeth's injuries for the first time when the patrol officers arrived on the scene. Lizette later described the fight with Elizabeth in more detail to Officer DeVille.
And I just started like calling the upstairs or downstairs.
He was downstairs, then I don't know if he was in the bathroom or in his bedroom downstairs. Yeah, the thing is downstairs. And so I went upstairs. She want to go back. I'm kind of like a oriented guy. So as you're on your back and she's trying to claw you, bite you, how are you defending yourself?
I just kind of block you.
So you have your hands in front of your face.
I know, literally, yeah.
Okay, the fucking. And then, but she eventually stopped.
No, I mean, yes. I only to get gone away from her. Oh, you know, I was there. I just kind of scooted my way and ran out to stairs and I told my phone calling her husband, and then, she brought his phone. I didn't even call from my own phone, and my phone, I lost me to my side call. That's what, instead, she brought his phone upstairs. She and I hid, and I went for to hide her. In my room, we locked the door, and so my daughter has two daughters. It got this, two doors, and she banging on the door.
So you're in the bathroom?
No, it's connected. The bathroom is connected
to
my bedroom.
So you're hiding in your bedroom?
With the doors locked. Oh, me and my son are both in that room with the doors locked. And we hear her in the kitchen. We hear her out there saying that and it sounds like it not really you can hear it. It's more like that. So it's I think that's impression.
She's banging on the door for that. You have to door her up. Why'd she with it not to bust to open the door straight? Or so what you do is all well things trying to get it out. In this interview, Lizette claimed that Elizabeth had been banging and screaming at her locked bedroom door during that 6 a.m. 911 phone call. However, none of these alleged noises could be heard in the background during that call. Also, something that should be mentioned is that Lizette lives in a duplex, and her next-door neighbor that she shares a wall with did not recall hearing any noise around that time either. She did, however, mention hearing banging noises around 3 a.m. Lizette further described how Elizabeth had no injuries prior to the arrival of the patrol officers. So the injuries just magically appeared just as the police officers showed up. But also, Lizette saw Elizabeth inflicting the injuries on herself earlier, and Elizabeth was able to bang on the room door and stab herself repeatedly at the same time. Sure, that checks out. Lizette then describes to Officer DeVille the main knife that Elizabeth allegedly used to stab herself with many times over and its possible location. Did you see anything? He said when you came out, you saw water and stuff. Did you see anything in your house that might have caused that? And he's like, well, object?
I saw a knife.
Okay, so you didn't see a knife.
But I didn't do anything because I was singing on the phone.
Okay, what was the knife?
Upstairs on the hangar.
Where at it?
Next to the couch.
Oh, what type of knife is this?
It's just it's either a thick knife or it was the size up. I get one or the other.
At 10:33 a.m., Desmond Hall was interviewed by Detective Jeff Bell over in the very next interrogation room. Rather than explaining what happened, Desmond asked for an attorney. So she has an injury. She's at the hospital, and so
things had to change from when the police first got there to now. Just very serious injuries. So, yeah, so that's why we got all that's why it's not guilty the dignity of it. Quite an original design, maybe a theme. Very well be an explanation for it. At 12:48 p.m., Officer DeVille returned to Lizette's interrogation room and informed her of Elizabeth's death at the hospital. Now, bear in mind that previously, Lizette stated that Elizabeth was uninjured prior to the arrival of the patrol officers. But Lizette's story immediately changed once she learned about the death.
Yes, we're hiding in the room, and I thought, that we were hiding. I had my son and I don't care.
I says this after the voice pin, or right before. I thought right, and not more swell, and let up to the house, and then I heard her in the cute swim. And then I heard her moan and I heard the talking and stuff. But I was like, baby who's saying that near for the cops got. I know I heard it my age widget that she just like and I like yours, but I just like never like I was in the age Scotland's home Kelly and Dora. I just like I think of it. I had the door locked, even if still I would honor the lines kusken because door other nights Later that afternoon, both Lizette and Desmond were freed from police custody, and despite Lizette's criminal history, neither her nor her son, Desmond Hall, were ever charged. After Elizabeth's death, a lot of misinformation was set in motion by her ex-boyfriend, Dustin. He told the APD that one time in the past, Elizabeth had supposedly handled a knife while having an altercation with him. However, Dustin's own sister commented that his memory can't necessarily be trusted, since he was often very forgetful as a result of his epilepsy, which causes occasional seizures. Incidentally, Elizabeth's toxicology report shows the presence of midazolam, a medication that Elizabeth was never prescribed and is used to treat seizures. Multiple friends of Elizabeth that were interviewed by the APD all disputed Lizette's description of her behavior. They all describe her as a non-violent, non-drug user and in a good mood when they last spoke. One friend in particular last saw Elizabeth 6 days earlier, but mentioned that Elizabeth called her the day before her death.
He called me with that he was kind of quite bad. That he forgot that like he was going to shoot her or something.
The day of Elizabeth's death, Lizette began to tell people that she had watched Elizabeth stab herself repeatedly and slit her own throat. Detective Bell called another friend that Elizabeth attempted to contact a couple of hours before the stabbing, and Bell asked for his perspective. Additional audio evidence from that day has recently surfaced that was originally suppressed by the APD, which includes first-hand accounts of what Lizette's neighbors saw and heard that morning.
She only said 2 sentences, but she killed a screaming. And all there was screaming and just the loudest. Boy, she can have you hear cement put out like guys. We are a lot.
Perhaps the most compelling eyewitness statement came from a neighbor who, according to Google Earth, lives only 177 feet away from Lizette's home. So as the family continued to fight to get the case reopened, they found it even more disturbing in January of 2021 when they found out that many of Elizabeth's friends and associates in Anchorage had thrown a birthday party for her around that same time. But who throws a birthday party for someone who recently died brutally under extremely abnormal circumstances and then invites the main suspect? As you can see from these images, they clearly had a great time. One friend in attendance did tell the family that he showed up in support of Elizabeth's memory, but was quickly creeped out by the aura upon arrival and Lizette's presence. Is it even possible that the extremely weird and horrifyingly inappropriate birthday party was intended as some sort of celebration of Elizabeth's death instead of her life? I mean, hey, it has been known to happen. The Santos family has also attempted to gain police dashcam footage of the APD patrol officers' initial arrival to Lizette's home, but the APD claims that this footage does not exist.
Based on jurisdictional restrictions, only an attorney licensed in Alaska can help the Santos family fight for justice. To date, the family has reached out to various law firms in Alaska, the State Bar Association, the Alaska Bureau of Investigations, the ACLU, and countless reporters, including the only reporter who wrote about the incident, Marlise Irby of KTUU. Their pleas for assistance have been ignored constantly, and reporter Marlise Irby eventually left the station without ever replying to requests to update her article. Other reporters in Anchorage have interviewed the family and promised to release the story, but never have. After further review of the crime scene photos, it was determined that there was actually a fourth knife found on a scene that was never mentioned in the police report. This knife was found in the garage nearby where Lizette said the fight between her and Elizabeth occurred. To further add to this, a recent conversation between Desmond Hall and a private investigator also confirms that Elizabeth did not stab herself.
It's almost like now there's a ghost. I didn't see her grab the line. I didn't see her cutting herself.
The head of APD's homicide unit, Sergeant Bianca Cross, and her superior officers still insist that the blood-soaked open robe that Elizabeth was wearing was actually soaked in sweat. Based on police reports, Lizette claims that the only substance she gave Elizabeth in the hours leading up to her death were 4 Benadryls. Also, keep in mind one key fact that Elizabeth's ex-boyfriend Dustin and Lizette's son Desmond are also friends with one another. Sergeant Cross continues to claim that there were no signs of a struggle and that the APD has no suspects. To date, Cross refuses to process any of the collected forensic information collected the day of the murder. The case was never ruled a homicide, and contrary to popular belief, it was never ruled a suicide by the medical examiner, and Elizabeth had no injuries to the neck whatsoever. Overall, it is really concerning as to why the APD and the media are going to such great lengths to suppress the story. Thus, it begs the question, who is connected to whom, and why is it so important that this case remains suppressed? In the state of Alaska, the statute of limitations to file a civil suit in a case like this is 2 years. August 8, 2022 marks this 2-year deadline. So it is most likely that the APD knows that they botched the entire investigation so badly that they are purposely waiting for this date to pass before they admit fault and reopen the case. So that's how it turned out that Elizabeth Omatara Santos, a young woman with no previous known history of violence, drug abuse, or mental instability, ended up dying from accidentally stabbing herself 10 times. According to our own verification and research, the drug midazolam typically produces sleepiness and is also used in surgical procedures for anesthesia. However, it was confirmed that it was never given to her during her emergency surgery. Based on the narrative that Desmond provided to the private investigator, the presence of midazolam and what Elizabeth was wearing, was it possible that sexual assault was also involved? Because honestly, I'd love to know how a drugged and incoherent person could possibly be insane enough to quickly stab themselves at least 10 times, yet coordinated enough to do it with 3 different knives and neatly clean each one and plant them in 3 different locations, all while pounding at a locked bedroom door. All I can say is that this whole case, with all its many inconsistencies, has left a severely bad taste in my mouth. Lastly, following Elizabeth's death, rumors resurfaced that Lizette was also allegedly involved in the fatal stabbing of her ex-boyfriend in Alaska a few years earlier. Now, while we cannot confirm this, there is a plethora of evidence supporting the incident with Elizabeth Santos, and there haven't been any reports on it either. In less than 2 months, the window for a civil lawsuit of legal liability against the APD will close for this case. We have until August 2022 to get the word out. We'll continue with this investigation for as long as we can, and we hope to bring you some real answers in a follow-up episode. In the meantime, we need your support. Sign the petition, share this video, and let's get the word out about the unsolved murder of Elizabeth Santos. The links are in the description of this video. If local news plus lawyers in Alaska start paying attention, this family can finally get the answers and the closure that they need. If her killers are walking free today, we want to see them caught and brought to justice.